I've been thinking a lot lately about how to find that sense of peace that everyone's always talking about, especially when life feels so chaotic sometimes.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you know it, this deep dive takes us right to the heart of it. Faith, trust, and managing anxiety. We'll be exploring trust in God and stop worrying about everything.
Hmm. What's interesting about this source is that it goes beyond just offering platitudes, you know?
Yeah.
It digs into the how, the practical steps we can take to shift our mindset and cultivate genuine peace through faith.
I love that. So where do we even begin?
Well, the source starts with prayer, but not in the way we might typically think about it. It talks about prayer as a two-way street, a dialogue where we not only speak to God,
Hmm.
but also learn to listen for his guidance.
Okay, I get the speaking part, but listening to God, what does that even sound like? Is it like hearing an actual voice?
Not necessarily. The source actually uses this beautiful phrase, human words meeting divine silence. It's about quieting our minds enough to discern his whispers, which might come through intuition, circumstances, or even the words of others.
So it's more about creating space for that inner knowing to emerge.
Exactly. It's about cultivating that sensitivity to the subtle ways God might be communicating with us. And it's not always easy, especially in our noisy, fast-paced world, but the source suggests practices like mindful meditation or simply incorporating moments of stillness into our day.
Makes sense. It's like we're tuning our internal radio to pick up a different frequency.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of shifting frequencies, the source also emphasizes the power of gratitude in transforming our outlook. It's not just about feeling thankful, it's about actively cultivating gratitude as a daily practice.
I've heard about gratitude journals, but the source mentioned something called the blessing journal. Is that the same thing?
It's similar, but with a specific focus on noticing the ways God is working in your life. It's
Hmm.
about recognizing those little miracles that we often take for granted. I was having a really tough day recently, felt overwhelmed, like everything was going wrong, but then I took a moment to list 5 things I was grateful for,
Okay.
and it completely shifted my perspective.
Wow, so you've actually tried this yourself. What kind of things did you write down?
Well, it sounds silly, but I was grateful for the cup of coffee I was drinking, the sunshine streaming through my window, and the fact that I had a warm bed to sleep in that night.
Okay.
Simple things, but focusing on them reminded me of all the good in my life, even amidst the chaos.
I love that. It's so easy to get caught up in the negative, but intentionally looking for the good can really change how we feel.
And it's not just about feeling good. There's actually a growing body of research on the psychological and neurological benefits of gratitude. Studies have shown that practicing gratitude can reduce stress, improve sleep, and even boost our immune system.
That's amazing. So it's like gratitude is not just a nice to have, it's actually essential for our well-being.
Exactly, and the source connects this to our spiritual well-being as well. It argues that gratitude aligns us more closely with God's character, helping us to see the world through his eyes, full of abundance and grace.
Okay, so we've got prayer as a two-way street and cultivating gratitude. What else does the source highlight as key to finding that unshakable peace?
Well, it brings up something that's been a real source of comfort for me lately, the importance of community and faith. It's not just about individual prayer, but coming together, supporting each other, and drawing strength from shared experiences.
I think we all crave that sense of belonging, that feeling of not being alone in our struggles. But sometimes it's hard to find that genuine connection.
The source actually talks about creating a culture of vulnerability within faith communities. It's about being willing to share not just our highlight reels, but also the messy, imperfect parts of our lives. And that's where real trust and intimacy are built.
I think that resonates with a lot of people. It's like we're so used to presenting this perfect facade to the world, especially on social media. But deep down, we all crave authenticity and connection.
Absolutely. And the source suggests that when we create that safe space within our faith communities to be real with each other, something magical happens. It's like those fears and worries that felt so heavy when we were carrying them alone suddenly become lighter because we're sharing the load.
That reminds me of this quote. When we pray together, we are reminded that we are not alone in our fears and worries. It's such a simple but powerful truth.
And what's fascinating to me is that the source connects this idea of community prayer directly with managing anxiety. It's
Yeah.
like when we share our struggles and victories with others, we create a web of support that helps us navigate the tough times.
It's funny because sometimes I forget about that. I get so caught up in my own head, trying to figure everything out on my own. But just having someone to talk to to pray with can make a world of difference.
It really can. And the source offers some practical ways to incorporate community prayer into our lives, like joining a small group, attending prayer meetings, or even just reaching out to a trusted friend or mentor to pray with. It's about creating those regular rhythms of connection and support.
So we've got prayer as a two-way conversation, the transformative power of gratitude, and the strength that comes from authentic community. But what about when anxiety really hits hard? Does the source offer any guidance for those moments?
It absolutely does. It acknowledges that anxiety is a common human experience, and then it offers practical ways to manage it through faith. One of the key pieces of advice comes directly from Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God.
I love that verse, but it's easier said than done, right? Like, how do you actually stop being anxious when you're in the middle of a stressful situation?
Well, the source points out that it's not about suppressing our anxieties or pretending they don't exist. It's about bringing them to God honestly and authentically, but doing so with a heart of gratitude.
So it's like acknowledging the worry, but choosing to focus on thankfulness at the same time.
Exactly. It's about shifting our perspective, remembering all the ways God has been faithful in the past, and trusting that He will continue to be faithful in the present.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not about following a set of rules or denying our human emotions. It's about cultivating these practices, prayer, gratitude, community that strengthen our faith and help us to navigate life's challenges with a sense of peace and trust.
And that leads us to the next big theme. The source explores the connection between obedience and trust. Because as we cultivate these practices, they become the foundation for a deeper level of trust and surrender to God.
You know, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Prayer, gratitude, community, they all seem to point towards this idea of surrender, of letting go of our own need for control and trusting in God's plan.
Yeah.
But that can be so hard, especially when we're facing difficult situations.
It definitely goes against our human nature, doesn't it?
Right.
We want to be in control, to know what's coming next, but this source suggests that true peace comes from releasing that grip and allowing God to lead us.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? It's one thing to say surrender, but when you're facing real-life challenges, job loss, health issues, relationship problems, it's hard to just switch off that worry and fear.
I hear you. And the source acknowledges that it's a process, not a one-time event.
Right.
It's about building that trust muscle little by little through our daily choices and actions.
Okay.
And it starts with obedience.
Okay, so we're not just talking about blindly following rules here.
Right. The source talks about obedience as an expression of love and devotion to God. It's about aligning our will with His, even when it doesn't make sense to us or when it feels difficult. And it gives this incredible example from the Bible, the story of Abraham.
Oh yeah, the one where God asks him to sacrifice his son Isaac. That's always been a tough one for me to wrap my head around.
It's definitely a challenging story, and it raises a lot of questions. But the source uses it to illustrate the depth of trust that's possible when we surrender to God's will, even when it seems impossible or even painful.
So it's about trusting that God sees the bigger picture, even when we can only see a tiny sliver of it.
Exactly. And the source reminds us that obedience isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. It's often about the small, everyday choices we make. Choosing kindness over anger, forgiveness over resentment, generosity over selfishness. It's about letting our actions reflect the love and grace we've received from God.
That makes it feel more doable, more applicable to everyday life. It's not about being perfect. It's about making those small choices that align with our faith.
And as we do that, as we practice obedience in those seemingly insignificant moments, something amazing happens. Our trust in God deepens. We start to see His faithfulness in ways we never noticed before. And that builds momentum, making it easier to trust Him with the bigger things as well.
It's like we're proving to ourselves, through our actions, that God is trustworthy, that He's got us. And that can be so empowering, especially when we're facing those anxieties and fears that threaten to overwhelm us.
Absolutely. And the source goes on to talk about how this personal journey of obedience and trust is meant to be lived out within a faith community. It's about supporting each other, encouraging each other, and holding each other accountable.
So it's not just about me and God. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, walking alongside each other on this journey of faith.
That's exactly it. And it goes beyond just being physically present at church or attending events. The source highlights the importance of transparency and vulnerability within a faith community. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to share their struggles and victories, their doubts and their triumphs.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I'm part of a small group, and it's amazing how much closer we've become as we've been more open and honest with each other about what we're going through.
I bet. It's powerful, isn't it? When we drop the masks and allow ourselves to be seen for who we truly are, flaws and all, that's where real connection happens. And those authentic relationships can make all the difference when it comes to facing challenges and navigating the ups and downs of life.
Because let's face it, life throws curveballs, and having that support system in place, those people who know the real you and love you anyway, can be a lifeline.
Absolutely. And those relationships can also help us to see our own blind spots, to recognize when we're holding on to control too tightly or when we're letting fear dictate our choices.
It's like having those trusted voices in your life who can gently nudge you back on track when you start to veer off course. And that kind of accountability can be so valuable, especially when it comes to cultivating trust in God.
I love that word, accountability, because it implies that we're not in this alone, that we have people who are invested in our spiritual growth, who are willing to walk alongside us and help us to become more like Christ.
And that brings us to a really important point that the source emphasizes. The fact that trust in God isn't passive. It's not just about believing he exists.
Right.
It's about actively choosing to place our lives in his hands, even when it feels scary.
That's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? It's one thing to talk about faith and trust, but it's another thing entirely to actually live it out, to make those daily choices that reflect our belief in God's goodness and his plan for our lives.
And that's where this next section of the source gets really interesting, because it dives into the concept of faith as the bedrock of trust.
It's like building a house. You need a solid foundation for it to stand strong, and the source argues that faith is that foundation for trust in God.
Okay, so we're not just talking about believing that God exists, we're talking about something deeper.
Exactly. It's about fully trusting in his character, his promises, and his word. And the source reminds us that faith isn't something we conjure up on our own. It's a gift from God, and it's nurtured through our engagement with his word.
That makes me think about how we were talking earlier about prayer as a two-way conversation. It's like we're opening ourselves up to hearing God's voice, not just through our own thoughts and feelings, but through his word as well.
That's a great connection. And the source gives some practical suggestions for how to do that, like making Bible reading a regular part of our routine, participating in Bible studies, and listening to sermons. It's about immersing ourselves in those words of wisdom and truth and allowing them to shape our hearts and minds.
It's like we're feeding our souls with the spiritual nourishment they need to grow strong in faith.
And as our faith grows stronger, so does our trust in God. It becomes less about blindly hoping for the best and more about resting in the certainty of his love and his faithfulness.
So it's like faith is the seed and trust is the fruit that grows from it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And as that fruit of trust matures, it starts to impact every area of our lives. We become less fearful, less anxious, more at peace with ourselves and with the world around us.
But what about when things don't go our way? When we pray for something and the answer seems to be no or not yet, does the source address that?
It absolutely does. And this is where the concept of patience in God's timing comes in. Because, let's be honest, waiting can be hard, especially in a world that values instant gratification.
Tell me about it. I'm the queen of wanting things to happen right now, but I'm also learning that sometimes the waiting is actually a gift.
That's such a great perspective. And the source echoes that sentiment. It emphasizes that waiting is a key part of spiritual growth.
Right.
It's in those seasons of waiting that our faith is tested and refined.
Like those times when we're forced to wait at a red light. It can be frustrating, but it's also an opportunity to pause, to breathe, to remember that we're not in control.
I love that analogy. And the source uses a powerful story from the Bible to illustrate this point. The story of Joseph.
Oh, wow. Joseph, the one who was sold into slavery by his brothers and then falsely accused and imprisoned.
That's him. Talk about a guy who had to wait on God's timing. But through it all, Joseph never lost sight of his faith. And ultimately, God's plan unfolded in a way he could never have imagined, leading him to a position of power and influence where he was able to save countless lives, including his own families.
It's a reminder that even when things seem completely hopeless, even when we're going through unimaginable pain and suffering, God is still working behind the scenes, orchestrating his plan for our good.
Exactly. And the source offers this comforting reminder from Psalm 27.14. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. It's a simple but profound message of encouragement to hold on to during those seasons of waiting.
It's funny because sometimes the simplest verses are the ones that hit the hardest. It's like we need that constant reminder to be patient, to trust that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our own timelines.
And as we learn to surrender to his timing, something amazing happens. We start to experience a deeper level of peace, a sense of contentment that transcends our circumstances.
It's like we're finally able to exhale, to let go of that constant striving and simply rest in the knowledge that God is in control.
And that brings us full circle back to gratitude, which this source emphasizes as a daily practice that can transform our outlook and deepen our faith.
It's like gratitude is the golden thread that weaves all of these concepts together. Prayer, community, obedience, trust, patience. It's the foundation and the fruit, the beginning and the end.
That's such a beautiful way to put it, and the source revisits the idea of keeping a gratitude journal, but it also encourages us to incorporate gratitude into our daily prayers. It's about starting each prayer with a heart of thankfulness, even before we present our requests to God.
It's like we're shifting our focus from what we lack to what we already have, from a sense of scarcity to a sense of abundance.
It's a subtle but powerful shift in perspective, and as we practice gratitude consistently, it starts to permeate every area of our lives, influencing how we see ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we experience the world around us.
I think this source has given us so much to think about, so many practical tools to help us cultivate deeper trust in God and experience more peace in our lives.
I completely agree. It's not just about head knowledge. It's about putting these principles into practice, making those daily choices that reflect our faith.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on one more thing that the source mentions, the idea of being ambassadors of God's peace.
Ah, yes. What a beautiful concept. It's like we're carrying that peace within us, and our actions and words can be a source of comfort and encouragement to others.
It's like we become walking, talking billboards for peace in a world that often feels anything but peaceful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image. And I think it speaks to the transformative power of living a life grounded in faith. It's not about escaping the world or ignoring its problems. It's about facing those challenges with a sense of hope and resilience that comes from knowing we're not alone.
But how do we actually do that? Like, how do we become those ambassadors of peace when we're surrounded by so much negativity and chaos?
Well, the source offers a few practical suggestions. One is to be intentional about cultivating peace in our own lives through prayer, through spending time in nature, through engaging in activities that bring us joy and connect us to our purpose. It's about filling our own cups so that we have something to pour out to others.
That makes sense. It's like the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. And the source also talks about the importance of being peacemakers in our relationships, choosing forgiveness over anger, seeking reconciliation over conflict, extending grace even when it's difficult.
It's about being that calming presence in the midst of a storm.
I love that. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means walking away from toxic situations. But it's always about choosing to respond with love and compassion rather than reacting with anger or fear.
And I think that's where the trust piece comes in. Because if we truly believe that God is in control, that He has a plan for our lives and for the world, then we can let go of that need to control everything and trust that He'll work things out for good, even if it's not on our timeline or in the way we expect.
Yeah, that's so powerful. It's about surrendering our will to His, even when it feels scary or uncertain.
And I think the source also makes a really important point about promoting this idea of trust and peacemaking within our faith communities. It suggests hosting events or workshops focused on conflict resolution, forgiveness, and building healthy relationships.
It's about equipping people with the tools they need to navigate those challenges in a way that honors God and brings peace to their lives and to the world around them.
It's like we're creating a ripple effect of peace, starting with our own hearts and then extending outward to our families, our communities, and ultimately the world.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And one of the things that really struck me as we were exploring this source is the emphasis on action. It's not enough to just talk about these concepts. Right. We have to actually live them out.
It's about putting our faith into practice, taking those small steps every day that reflect our trust in God and our desire to be agents of peace in the world.
And those steps might look different for each of us. For some, it might be volunteering at a local soup kitchen or mentoring a young person. For others, it might be speaking up against injustice or simply being a kind and compassionate presence in their everyday interactions.
It's about finding those unique ways that God is calling us to make a difference in the world, to shine His light into the darkness and bring hope to those who are hurting.
And sometimes those acts of service, those moments of peacemaking, might seem small and insignificant, but the source reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can have a ripple effect that we might never fully comprehend.
It's like planting a seed. We might not see the fruit of it right away, but over time, it has the potential to grow into something beautiful and life-giving.
That's a great analogy, and it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Be the change you wish to see in the world.
That's Gandhi, right?
It is. And it speaks to the power we each have to make a difference, to be those ambassadors of peace that this source is calling us to be.
And I think it all comes back to that foundation of trust. If we truly believe that God is good, that He loves us and has a plan for our lives, then we can face the uncertainties of life with courage and hope, knowing that He's got us no matter what.
And we can extend that same grace and compassion to others, helping to create a world that reflects His love and peace.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I feel so inspired after exploring this source. It's given me so much to think about and so many practical ways to deepen my own faith and cultivate more peace in my life.
Me too. It's a reminder that peace isn't something we find out there somewhere. It's something we cultivate within ourselves, and it's a journey we don't have to take alone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Trust in God and Stop Worrying About Everything. We hope it's given you some valuable insights and practical tools to help you navigate life's challenges with more peace, trust, and joy. Until next time, may you be blessed with an abundance of God's peace.